In the grim darkness of the far future, there exists a collision so fundamental, so violently opposed in nature, that it represents one of the most catastrophic encounters imaginable within the Imperium of man. Picture, if you will, the most sacred sanctuary of a Space Marine chapter, a place where heroes sleep away the centuries, where ancient warriors rest in honored silence, where the very air thrums with reverence and the weight of 10,000 years of service. Now imagine this sanctum violated by the most chaotic, savage, and utterly irreverent force in the galaxy, the Orks. This is not merely a battle. This is the meeting of two fundamentally incompatible philosophies of war, life, and death. On one side stand the Dreadnoughts, those walking tombs that house the remains of Space Marine, heroes too valuable to let die. Warriors whose service to the Emperor continues long past the point where their bodies should have failed them. They are monuments to duty, sacrifice, and the Imperium's refusal to let its greatest champions rest. On the other side crash the Orks, beings for whom war is not duty but joy, for whom the concept of sacred ground means nothing except perhaps a good place for a fight, and for whom every piece of technology is just another thing to loot, modify, and turn into something gloriously destructive. The Dreadnought Crypt represents everything the Imperium holds dear about continuity, tradition, and the preservation of wisdom across the ages. These vast halls buried deep within fortress, monasteries are more than storage facilities. They are shrines. They are libraries of living memory. Each sarcophagus contains not just a warrior, but an entire era of chapter history, battles fought and won, lessons learned through centuries of combat. Tech Marines tend to these ancient warriors with religious devotion, anointing their armor with sacred oils, chanting litanies of preservation, maintaining systems that have kept these heroes alive for longer than most human civilizations endure. When Orks breach such a place, they bring with them everything that makes them the most successful species in the galaxy, and simultaneously the most frustrating enemy the Imperium has ever faced. Orks don't understand reverence. They don't grasp the concept of historical significance. To an Ork, a 10,000-year-old Dreadnought chassis covered in purity seals and battle honors is just a really big, really impressive piece of machinery that would look even better painted red and covered in spikes. The ancient warrior within, whose wisdom has guided chapter masters and whose memories stretch back to the founding of the Imperium. Just another target, or if they're lucky, another trophy. This fundamental incompatibility creates scenarios of almost theatrical tragedy. Imagine an ancient venerable Dreadnought, a warrior who fought alongside the Primarchs themselves, who remembers the Emperor walking among his sons, who has guided his chapter through 10 millennia of warfare, awakening to find his sacred resting place overrun by green-skinned barbarians who are hitting his sarcophagus with crude hammers, while arguing about whether his assault cannon would work better if they painted it yellow. The disconnect is so absolute, so complete, that it becomes almost darkly comedic, even as it unfolds into violence of the most brutal kind. But make no mistake, despite the apparent mismatch between the sophisticated technology of the Dreadnoughts and the crude weapons of the Orks, these encounters are deadly serious affairs. Orks may be savage, but they are not stupid. They are supernaturally tough, absurdly strong, and when gathered in sufficient numbers, can overwhelm virtually any defense through sheer weight of bodies and firepower. The mech boys among them possess an intuitive understanding of technology that borders on the supernatural, able to cobble together functioning weapons from what should be scrap metal and wire. And when motivated by the prospect of looting such impressive war machines, Orks become even more dangerous than usual. The breaching of a Dreadnought Crypt by Ork forces represents one of the greatest catastrophes that can befall a Space Marine chapter. These are not merely weapons being stolen or facilities being destroyed. Each Dreadnought lost is irreplaceable. The technology to create new Dreadnought chassis is largely lost to the Imperium, with most chapters maintaining their existing walkers through increasingly difficult repairs using stockpiled parts and cannibalization of damaged units. The warriors within are even more precious. Veterans of thousands of battles, walking repositories of chapter lore and tactical knowledge, links to the chapter's founding and earliest days. Their lost tears holes in the chapter's institutional memory that can never be filled. For the Orks, however, such a discovery represents the greatest prize imaginable. Here are walking tanks, massive war machines bristling with weapons, each one a potential addition to a warboss's personal retinue, or a source of parts for dozens of other projects. The fact that these machines contain living occupants who will violently object to being looted is, to the Ork mind, just an added bonus. It means they get a good fight and good loot. What could be better? The scenarios that unfold when these two forces meet in the confined spaces of a Dreadnought crypt are studies in contrasts. Ancient warriors, some of whom have slept for centuries, must rapidly orient themselves to battle in conditions they never trained for, defending not an open battlefield, but the very halls where they are stored, fighting not to protect distant Imperial citizens, but to preserve their own existence and that of their brothers. The Orks, meanwhile, find themselves in an environment rich with targets and loot, but also filled with enemies far more dangerous than the typical Imperial guardsmen they might be used to crushing in open warfare. Each Dreadnought, even freshly awakened and not yet at full combat readiness, is a walking fortress capable of decimating entire mobs of Orks. The psychological dimension of such encounters cannot be overstated. For the Space Marines who respond to defend the crypt, they are fighting to protect not just equipment, but their spiritual fathers, the ancient heroes whose example inspires them and whose wisdom guides them. The violation of the Dreadnought crypt is a desecration that strikes at the very heart of chapter identity. They will fight with a fury that goes beyond even the normal fanaticism of the Adeptus Astartes, because this is deeply, intensely personal in a way that most battles cannot match. For the Orks, the equation is simpler but no less motivating. These are the biggest, toughest, most impressive enemies they've encountered in a long time, and they're all gathered in one place. The chance to claim one of these machines, to tear it apart and rebuild it in proper Orky fashion. To boast about defeating warriors that other races treat as demigods, this is the stuff of Ork legend. A nob who can claim to have defeated and looted a Dreadnought gains instant status. A warboss who can capture an entire crypt full of them becomes the stuff of WH spawning legend. What follows in the depths of these fortress monasteries, in halls designed for quiet contemplation and careful maintenance, is warfare at its most intense and personal. Every corner turned might reveal another awakening Dreadnought, servos warming up and weapon systems coming online. Every chamber cleared might contain mobs of Orks, trying to crack open sarcophagi to see what's inside, or mech boys attempting to hotwire weapons systems while under fire. The confined spaces that should offer protection instead become kill, zones where heavy weapons fire ricochets off adamantium walls, and the sheer noise of battle becomes a physical force. This is where we find one of the most compelling stories in Warhammer 40k. The unstoppable meeting the immovable, the sacred confronting the profane, and ancient warriors who thought they had seen everything discovering that 10,000 years of service still hasn't prepared them for the sheer insane audacity of the Orks. The Dreadnought crypt, a living mausoleum. To understand the catastrophe of Ork invasion, we must first understand what a Dreadnought crypt truly represents. These are not simple storage facilities, or even typical armories. The halls where Dreadnoughts rest between deployments are among the most sacred spaces in any Space Marine chapter, treated with a reverence that approaches the religious. They are simultaneously tombs, temples, and armories, places where the boundary between life and death becomes meaningfully blurred. Deep within the heart of every fortress, monastery, buried beneath layers of adamantium and ferrocrete, protected by void shields and null field generators, lie these vast chambered halls. The architecture itself speaks to their significance. Vaulted ceilings soar overhead, often reaching heights of 30 meters or more, decorated with ancient frescoes depicting the chapter's greatest victories and the deeds of the warriors entombed below. The walls are lined with alcoves, each containing a Dreadnought in its dormant state, standing in positions that evoke both sentinels and sleeping giants. The lighting is deliberately dim, reverent, with illumination coming from perpetual flames that have burned for centuries and the soft glow of monitoring equipment that never sleeps. The air in these crypts carries a distinctive character. There's the ever-present scent of sacred oils and unguents applied by tech Marines during their daily ministrations. The sharp tang of ozone from power systems kept on eternal standby. The faint metallic undertone that comes from ancient machinery that has not moved in decades or even centuries. But beyond these physical sensations, there's something else, an almost tangible weight of history and sacrifice that seems to press down on any who enter. Even veteran Space Marines speak in hushed tones when visiting the crypts, and for good reason. Each dreadnought in its alcove represents an individual tragedy transformed into eternal service. The warriors within suffered wounds so catastrophic that even the advanced medical technology of the Adeptus Astartes could not save them. Crushed spines, shattered bodies, burns that consumed most of their flesh. Rather than allowing these heroes to die, the chapter's apothecaries and tech Marines performed the sacred rite of interment, removing everything that couldn't be saved and sealing what remained, sometimes little more than a brain, a few vital organs, and portions of the spinal cord, into the armored sarcophagus at the heart of each dreadnought chassis. The suffering involved in this process cannot be overstated. Imperial technology provides life support, but offers no escape from sensation. The occupants feel their injuries constantly. Every moment of their existence a reminder of the wounds that should have killed them. Extended neural interface with something as massive and complex as a dreadnought creates immense psychological stress. Confusion, dyschronometria, the loss of ability to accurately perceive time, lethargy, and even senility can result. This is why, when not needed for battle, these warriors are kept in a form of suspended animation, allowed to sleep away the centuries in stasis fields that slow their perception of time to a crawl. The maintenance of these ancient warriors is a sacred duty that falls to the chapter's tech, Marines and their attendant servitors. Every day, without exception, these warriors of the Omnissiah visit each dreadnought, performing rituals of preservation that are equal parts mechanical maintenance and religious observance. Sacred oils are applied to joints and servos. Purity seals are carefully checked and replaced if they show any sign of degradation. Litanies of preservation are chanted while diagnostic systems are examined. Power cells are rotated and tested. Weapon systems are anointed and blessed. Life support systems receive constant monitoring, every fluctuation noted and adjusted for. This isn't mere superstition or empty ritual. The dreadnoughts represent some of the oldest technology still in regular use by the Imperium, with some chassis dating back to the Great Crusade itself, more than 10,000 years in the past. The knowledge of how to manufacture new dreadnought shells has been largely lost, existing only in fragments scattered across various forge worlds, or preserved in the most ancient archives of the Adeptus Mechanicus. This means every dreadnought is effectively irreplaceable. When components fail, tech Marines must scavenge parts from other, more damaged units, or fabricate replacements using stockpiled materials that are themselves dwindling. The rituals performed daily aren't just religious observance, they're essential maintenance procedures that keep these ancient machines functional. But the dreadnought crypts contain more than just dormant war machines. They are living archives, repositories of knowledge and memory that stretch back across millennia. The occupants of these sarcophagi remember battles fought when the Imperium was young. They fought in the Great Crusade under the command of the Emperor's own sons, the Primarchs. They witnessed the Horus Heresy, the greatest civil war in human history. They remember the structure of the Imperium before the Codex Astartes, the way chapters organized themselves in the immediate aftermath of the heresy, tactical doctrines that have long since fallen out of use, but might be crucial for facing forgotten enemies. This makes them invaluable counselors. When a chapter master faces a strategic dilemma without precedent, he might order the awakening of a venerable dreadnought who faced similar circumstances millennia ago. When the chapter encounters an enemy thought long extinct, an ancient one might remember fighting them before and know their weaknesses. When traditions are disputed or the meaning of chapter rituals becomes unclear, these warriors can explain the original intent because they were there when those traditions were established. They are living bridges to the past, tangible connections to the chapter's history and heritage. The naming conventions around these warriors reflect their significance. They are called the Ancients, or Old Ones, titles that convey both respect and recognition of their age. Individual dreadnoughts often carry names that combine their original identity with their current status. Ancient Helveticus of the Dark Angels, Brother Ancient Gareth, Venerable Mordian. Some, particularly distinguished, are referred to by evocative titles that speak to their deeds. Jorn the Fell, handed oldest living space marine in the Imperium, who fought at Lemon Russ's side during the Horus Heresy. Ancient Relenor, the Ancient of Rites, whose loyalty remained true even when his legion fell to chaos. The specific layout of a dreadnought crypt varies by chapter, reflecting their unique traditions and circumstances. Some chapters, like the Ultramarines, maintain orderly rows of alcoves, each clearly labeled with the occupant's name, deeds, and date of interment. Others arrange their dreadnoughts in circles or other symbolic formations. The Space Wolves, ever different, keep their dreadnoughts in the frozen halls deep within the Fang. Their fortress, monastery built into the tallest mountain on Fenris, where the extreme cold helps preserve the ancient systems. Some chapters maintain multiple crypts, scattered throughout their fortress, monastery, while others keep all their dreadnoughts in a single massive hall. Security around these crypts is layered and absolute. The outermost defenses consist of the fortress, monastery itself, walls meters thick, bristling with weapon emplacements, protected by void shields capable of withstanding orbital bombardment. Beyond that lie multiple security checkpoints, blast doors thick enough to stop anti-tank weapons, and monitoring systems that track every approach. The corridors leading to the crypts are designed as kill zones, easily defensible and filled with automated weapons systems that can be activated in case of intrusion. The final approaches are guarded by the chapter's most trusted warriors, often veterans specifically assigned to protect these sacred spaces. Inside the crypts themselves, security continues. Each dreadnought's alcove is equipped with sensors that monitor the sarcophagus's occupant continuously. Any deviation from expected parameters triggers alerts. Stasis field generators maintain the warriors in their suspended state, but can be deactivated in moments if the chapter needs to wake them. The crypts are sealed against teleportation, warded against psychic intrusion, and built with self-destruct systems that can be triggered if the position becomes completely untenable. The logic is brutal, but clear: better to destroy the dreadnoughts than allow them to fall into enemy hands intact. The psychological and spiritual significance of these spaces extends to how Space Marines experience them. For young initiates and newly inducted battle brothers, visits to the dreadnought crypts are profound experiences. Here they see the physical manifestation of their chapter's promise: in death, duty continues. These are warriors who gave everything, literally everything, to continue serving the Emperor and their chapter. Their example is meant to inspire, to remind every Space Marine that death is not the end of service, merely a transition to another form of warfare. For veteran Space Marines, the crypts are places of contemplation and sometimes painful reflection. These are brothers who fought beside them, whose loss was mourned, but who continue on in a form that might be blessing or curse depending on perspective. Some chapters treat dreadnought interment as the highest honor, a chance for their greatest heroes to serve eternally. Others view it with more ambivalence, acknowledging the necessity while recognizing the suffering involved. The Space Wolves, characteristically direct, sometimes refer to their dreadnoughts as those who wait in the dark, acknowledging both the honor of their position and the isolation they endure. The chapter's chaplains and librarians visit the crypts regularly, not just for practical purposes, but for spiritual ones. They speak to the sleeping ancients, updating them on chapter affairs, even though they cannot hear in stasis. They maintain the records of each warrior's deeds, ensuring that no accomplishment is forgotten. No battle goes unrecorded. They lead prayers and observances on significant dates, the anniversary of the occupant's interment, the dates of battles where they distinguished themselves, holy days sacred to the chapter and the emperor. The crypts also serve as a form of library, though not in any conventional sense. Many chapters maintain written or digital records of conversations with their dreadnoughts, creating archives of tactical knowledge and historical insights. When an ancient is awakened for consultation, marines and librarians record every word, preserving the wisdom of beings whose memory spans millennia. These records are treated as sacred texts, studied by officers, and sometimes quoted in the same breath as the Codex Astartes itself. There's a particular poignancy to the fact that these warriors, who gave everything to continue serving, spend most of their existence in dreamless sleep. The alternative, remaining conscious while unable to move, trapped in a metal shell with only memories for company, would drive most beings mad. The stasis sleep is a mercy, but it means these warriors experience time in fragments. They awaken, fight a battle or offer counsel, and then return to sleep, often for decades or centuries. When they wake again, the world has changed. Brothers they knew are dead. Enemies they fought are dust. The galaxy has moved on without them, and they must rapidly orient themselves to new circumstances before being thrown back into battle. Yet despite these hardships, despite the suffering inherent in Dreadnought existence, most chapters would fight to the last marine to protect their crypts. These are not just weapons. They are ancestors. They are teachers. They are the living memory of everything the chapter has been and done. Their wisdom has saved campaigns. Their counsel has prevented disasters. Their example inspires every battle, brother to greater heights of courage and sacrifice. In a very real sense, the Dreadnought crypts are the soul of the chapter made manifest. This is the place that the Orks violate when they breach the sanctum. This is the sacred ground they defile with their presence. And this is why the response, when it comes, will be absolute and merciless. Understanding the greenskin menace, to fully grasp the chaos that unfolds when Orks discover a Dreadnought crypt, we must first understand what the Orks truly are and what drives them. The greenskins are perhaps the most successful species in the galaxy. Present on virtually every world humanity has ever explored, outnumbering possibly every other intelligent starfaring race with the potential exception of the Terranids. They are spread across 1 million worlds and have created empires that have endured for millennia, despite the best efforts of the Imperium to eradicate them. Understanding why they are so successful and so dangerous begins with understanding their fundamental nature. Orks are not truly animals, despite what their enemies might claim. Nor are they entirely fungus, though they possess the physiological features of fungi in addition to animal traits. They are something unique in the galaxy, a hybrid life form that combines the advantages of both kingdoms into something terrifyingly effective. Orks reproduce through spores released from their skin throughout their lives, and especially at death. This means every ork that dies on a world seeds that planet with the potential for more orks. It's nearly impossible to completely eliminate an ork infestation once it's established, as even killing every visible ork doesn't stop new ones from sprouting from spores that might have been spread years earlier. This fungal reproduction means orks have no families in any traditional sense, no parents to mourn, no children to protect. They quite literally view all other orks as brothers, because in a very real biological sense they are. But this doesn't create the kind of brotherly affection humans might imagine. Instead, Ork society is ruthlessly hierarchical, based entirely on the principle of might makes right. The biggest, strongest ork is in charge, period. No democracy, no voting, no complex political maneuvering, just the simple application of physical power. If you're bigger and meaner, you're the boss. If someone bigger and meaner comes along, they're the new boss. It's a system of elegant simplicity that works, because orks are psychologically programmed to instinctively respect size and strength. The ork brain is a marvel of straightforward design. They are not stupid. This is a crucial point that the Imperium has learned at great cost. But they think in fundamentally different ways from humans. Abstract philosophy doesn't interest them. Complex logistics bore them. But show them a problem that can be solved through violence, mechanical ingenuity, or sheer audacious boldness, and they'll often solve it with shocking effectiveness. Their technology shouldn't work by any reasonable understanding of physics, yet it does. Partly through crude but effective engineering, and partly through the gestalt psychic field all orcs generate, which allows their collective belief to influence reality itself in subtle but significant ways. This psychic field, called the WH, is one of the most poorly understood phenomena in the galaxy. It allows orcs to instinctively recognize who is bigger, and therefore who should be in charge, even when size isn't immediately apparent. It may be what allows their ramshackle technology to function, as the Imperium has noted that many orc weapons simply refuse to work when wielded by non-orcs, suggesting that the greenskins' belief that their gear works is actually what makes it work. It also explains why orcs genuinely believe that red vehicles go faster, that more Dakas firepowered is always better, and that painting things in specific colors grants specific benefits. Because on some level, the bogey field makes these beliefs partially true. But the WH is more than just a psychic quirk. It's also the name for the massive military campaigns that orcs periodically launch. And understanding these is crucial to understanding how orcs might breach even the most heavily defended fortress monastery. A mortgage occurs when an orc population reaches critical mass, and a particularly powerful war boss emerges who is big enough, mean enough, and charismatic enough to unite multiple tribes and clans under his banner. The WH combines elements of a military campaign, a religious crusade, a massive looting spree, and a pub crawl that spans star systems. It's war at its purest, waged for no reason beyond the joy of fighting and the desire to prove that orcs are the biggest and the best. Once a WH gains momentum, it becomes nearly unstoppable. Word spreads across orc-infested worlds through means the Imperium doesn't fully understand. Possibly the psychic gestalt field, possibly crude but effective communication systems, possibly both. Orcs hear about the fighting and travel to join it, drawn by the promise of a proper scrap. As more orcs join, the WH grows stronger, which attracts even more orcs, creating a feedback loop that can see millions of greenskins descending on a target. These campaigns often continue until the war boss is killed. The orcs run out of enemies to fight and turn on each other, or they get distracted by a bigger fight elsewhere. But while they last, are capable of shattering entire sectors and threatening major imperial holdings. The orc approach to warfare is distinctive and, from an imperial tactical perspective, deeply frustrating. They have no real concept of strategic resources or logistical chains in the human sense. They don't worry about supply lines, because they can eat almost anything organic, and their weapons are designed for ease of battlefield, repair rather than careful maintenance. They don't care about casualties, because more orcs are always spawning somewhere, and besides, death in a good fight is about the best end an orc can imagine. They don't surrender, don't retreat in any organized fashion, and don't negotiate except occasionally under duress, and usually while planning betrayal. What makes them particularly dangerous is their culture of looting. Orcs love technology, not in the reverent way the Adeptus Mechanicus loves it, but with a sort of joyful, destructive creativity. They'll take anything that looks useful, or useless but interesting, and repurpose it for their own ends. Imperial tanks become looted wagons, repainted in garish colors and festooned with additional weapons. Enemy weapons are stripped from corpses and pressed into service immediately. Entire facilities get dismantled for parts. This isn't just opportunistic scavenging, it's a fundamental part of orc warfare and culture. A successful raid is measured not just by enemies killed, but by the quality and quantity of loot acquired. Different orc clans have different specializations and obsessions, and understanding these is crucial to predicting how they'll behave when they breach a Dreadnought crypt. The Death Skulls, painted blue, because they believe it brings luck, are the ultimate looters. They'll steal anything not nailed down, and they'll bring wrenches for the things that are nailed down. Before a battle even starts, Death Skulls are eyeing up what they want to loot, and they're not above stealing from other orcs. For them, a Dreadnought Crypt would be the ultimate treasure trove, ancient technology, rare materials, and weapon systems beyond their wildest dreams. The Bad Moons, identifiable by their love of yellow paint and bling, are the richest orcs. Their teeth grow faster than other orcs, and since orcs use teeth as currency, Bad Moons are naturally wealthy. They love showing off their wealth through ostentatious displays of firepower and massive amounts of gear. For a Bad Moon Nob, capturing a Dreadnought would be the ultimate status symbol. The Evil Sons are speed freaks obsessed with red paint, because they believe it makes things go faster. They'd look at a Dreadnought and immediately start planning how to make it faster and louder. The Goths are the biggest and the meanest, focused on close combat and proving their superiority through sheer physical dominance. Each clan would approach a discovered Dreadnought Crypt differently, but all would share certain commonalities. They'd be excited beyond measure at finding so many impressive war machines in one place. They'd immediately start arguing about who gets to loot what. They'd have zero understanding or respect for the sacred nature of the space they've invaded. And they'd be utterly, dangerously confident in their ability to take what they want, consequences be damned. The mech boys deserve special mention because they're crucial to understanding what happens after orcs breach the crypt. These are orcs with an intuitive, almost supernatural understanding of technology. They can look at a machine they've never seen before and somehow understand its basic function. Give them a pile of scrap and some time, and they'll build something that by all rights shouldn't work, but somehow does. A mech boy examining a dormant Dreadnought would see possibilities, weapons to strip out and repurpose, armor to salvage, power systems to study and replicate in crude but effective form. The knowledge that there's something alive inside wouldn't deter them. If anything, it would make the whole endeavor more interesting. Orc combat doctrine, such as it is, relies on overwhelming firepower and numbers. They call it Mordaka, the belief that there is no problem that cannot be solved by applying more guns in greater quantities. Their weapons are crude but effective, designed to be easily repaired on the battlefield, using whatever materials are at hand. Shooters, essentially fully automatic rifles, rockets that are more explosive than accurate. Def guns cobbled together from whatever heavy weapons could be found or built. They favor close combat, where their natural toughness and strength give them advantages. Wielding massive choppers, enormous bladed weapons that would require superhuman strength to wield effectively, which orcs possess in abundance. But perhaps most dangerous is the sheer enthusiasm orcs bring to warfare. They don't fight because they must, but because they want to. Combat isn't a grim necessity, but the greatest joy they know. This means they don't experience the morale problems that plague other armies. They don't break and run when things go badly. They get more excited because the fight just got more interesting. They don't fear death. They fear boredom and the possibility of missing out on a good scrap. This makes them exceptionally dangerous enemies because the normal psychological weapons that work against other opponents, fear, despair, the hope of survival through surrender, mean nothing to them. The orc relationship with pain and injury is also relevant to understanding combat in a Dreadnought Crypt. Orcs are extraordinarily tough, able to survive injuries that would kill humans several times over. They have redundant organs, incredibly thick skin, and a physiology that seems almost designed for taking punishment. More importantly, they don't seem to experience pain the way humans do. An orc can lose an arm and be more annoyed about the inconvenience than hurt by it. This means that wounds that would incapacitate normal soldiers merely slow orcs down, and then only temporarily. Even dead, orcs sometimes get back up if the fight was exciting enough, driven by sheer belligerence and refusal to accept that they're beaten. When a Rurich reaches a fortress monastery, it typically does so with overwhelming numbers. We're not talking about hundreds or even thousands of orcs. Successful invasions of Space Marine homeworlds have involved millions of greenskins. They arrive in crude but effective spacecraft, crash landing when necessary, teleporting when possible, and sometimes just riding asteroids they've hollowed out and fitted with engines. They hit targets with wave after wave of attackers, accepting casualties that would destroy any sane military force because to them, those casualties are just part of the fun. Breaking into a fortress, monastery requires resources beyond what most orc forces possess. But a major warrior with a clever warboss can manage it. They might use captured Imperial technology against its makers, looted wagons based on baneblades or captured artillery pieces. They might tunnel through supposedly impenetrable walls, using mining equipment designed for asteroid operations. They might exploit some weakness in the defenses, some momentary vulnerability created by circumstances the Space Marines couldn't predict. Or they might just keep throwing bodies at the problem until the defenses are overwhelmed through sheer weight of numbers and firepower. And once inside, once they've breached the outer defenses and penetrated into the fortress, monastery proper, the orcs become even more dangerous. These confined spaces, designed for Space Marines who rely on precise tactical coordination, become chaotic brawls where the orcs' natural advantages in close combat can shine. The narrow corridors that should be defensible become crowded death traps when hundreds of orcs are pushing through them. The secure blast doors that were meant to contain invasions become obstacles that orcs simply blow apart or cut through. And the deeper they go, the more likely they are to stumble upon something they weren't looking for, but are absolutely delighted to find the Dreadnought Crypt. The discovery is usually accidental. Orcs aren't sophisticated enough to specifically target the crypt. They don't study fortress, monastery layouts, or develop elaborate plans to reach specific objectives. They just push forward, looking for good fights and good loot. But when they breach one of those massive armored doors and find themselves in a vast hall filled with towering war machines, each one bristling with weapons, standing in honored alcoves like sleeping giants, that's when the really interesting part begins. Because to the orcs, this isn't a sacred space. It's not a shrine to fallen heroes or a repository of irreplaceable knowledge. It's the biggest, most impressive loot room they've ever seen. Every dreadnought represents a massive prize: weapons, armor, technology far beyond anything they normally capture. The size alone would make orcs respect them, because orcs respect size and power above all else. And the fact that these machines aren't just sitting there broken, but are obviously maintained and functional, that's even better. That means they might wake up and provide a proper fight before being looted. This collision of worldviews, orc enthusiasm meeting Space Marine sanctity, creates the conditions for what happens next. The orcs aren't deterred by the reverent atmosphere, or the warning signs, or the obvious danger. If anything, these things excite them more. This is proper loot. The kind of prize that would make a nob's reputation and possibly elevate a war boss to legendary status. The fact that taking it will be extremely difficult and extremely dangerous just means it will be extremely fun. And when you're an orc, what else could you possibly want? The fortress, monastery under siege, the nightmare scenario for any Space Marine. Chapter begins not with the breach of the Dreadnought Crypt, but hours or days earlier, with the first warnings that a WH is approaching. These warnings come through many channels: astropathic screams from nearby systems under attack, panicked Vox transmissions from Imperial outposts, or sensor arrays detecting the massive, crude spacecraft of an orc fleet emerging from the warp. Sometimes there's time to prepare. Sometimes the orcs arrive with devastating surprise, appearing in the system almost without warning, their trajectory aimed directly at the fortress, monastery. A fortress, monastery is designed to be impregnable. These aren't mere military bases or even standard Imperial fortifications. They are monuments to 10,000 years of defensive architecture, incorporating lessons learned across millennia of warfare. Built into mountains, buried beneath ground, positioned on barren moons or asteroids, or in the case of fleet-based chapters, serving as massive spacecraft drifting through the void. Every fortress, monastery shares certain characteristics: They are designed to withstand virtually any assault, from orbital bombardment to ground invasion to infiltration by enemy operatives. The outer defenses begin at the system's edge. A Space Marine homeworld typically has multiple space stations, orbital weapons platforms, and system defense ships that form the first line of resistance. These installations are equipped with lance batteries, capable of crippling capital ships, torpedo banks that can saturate space with warheads, and fighter wings that can intercept incoming landing craft. Against normal enemies, these defenses are usually sufficient to prevent any hostile landing. Against a full walk WH40K, they become a delaying action, buying time, but ultimately unable to prevent the inevitable green tide from reaching the surface. When Ork forces make planetfall, and they always eventually make planetfall when facing a determined WH40K, they encounter the fortress, monastery's ground defenses. These typically consist of layered defense zones, extending for kilometers around the primary structure. Minefields sophisticated enough to trouble even Ork vehicles. Automated weapons systems that can be controlled remotely or operate independently. Kill zones established with overlapping fields of fire. Defensive structures ranging from simple bunkers to full fortress complexes. And always, Space Marines themselves. The chapter's defenders taking up positions in carefully prepared defensive lines. The siege itself is an apocalyptic affair. Ork forces don't conduct careful, methodical assaults. They attack in waves, each one testing different parts of the defense, probing for weaknesses, while wearing down the defenders through sheer attrition. The first waves consist of boys, regular Ork infantry, if such a term can apply to 7-foot, tall green-skinned warriors armed with automatic weapons and vicious melee implements. They charge forward with characteristic enthusiasm, dying in droves to the Space Marines' precisely aimed bolter fire, but always achieving something. Clearing minefields by triggering them, identifying weapon emplacements, revealing defensive positions. Behind these waves come heavier elements. Looted tanks rumble forward, their patchwork armor somehow deflecting shots that should penetrate easily. Trucks and battle wagons packed with Orks race toward the walls, their passengers howling battle cries that can be heard even over the thunder of artillery. Deft Dreads and killer cans, the Orks' crude approximations of Dreadnoughts, stomp through the carnage, their weapons spraying suppressing fire or swinging crude power claws at defensive structures. And above it all, Ork aircraft strafe and bomb, their pilots as likely to crash into targets as hit them with weapons, and not particularly concerned about the difference. The Space Marines defend with characteristic skill and fury. Every shot counts when you're outnumbered potentially thousands to one. Tactical squads lay down withering fire from prepared positions, their bolters barking in controlled bursts that maximize ammunition efficiency. Devastator squads employ heavy weapons, las cannons to punch through Ork armor, heavy bolters to scythe through infantry, missile launchers to engage anything in between. Scout squads operate ahead of the main lines, gathering intelligence and picking off priority targets. And when the Orks inevitably breach the outer defenses, assault squads drop from the skies or emerge from hidden sully ports, their chainswords and power weapons cutting through the green tide. But numbers tell. They always tell against Orks. For every 100 greenskins killed, 200 more push forward. For every looted wagon destroyed, another crashes through the wreckage and continues the advance. The Space Marines are superhuman, but they are not infinite, and their ammunition, while stockpiled extensively, is not inexhaustible. Defense lines that should hold indefinitely begin to buckle under the sustained assault. Positions that were thought impregnable get overrun through sheer weight of numbers. And slowly, inexorably, the Orks push closer to the fortress, monastery itself. The final approach to the monastery typically involves breaching the outer walls. Meters, thick adamantium, and ceramite designed to withstand starship-grade weaponry. Orks approach this problem with typical directness. They apply explosives. Lots of explosives. Mech boys rig massive charges using every volatile substance they can scavenge, pack, or manufacture. Sometimes these attempts fail catastrophically, with explosions eliminating hundreds of Orks in spectacular fashion. But sometimes they work, blowing massive holes in supposedly impenetrable walls and creating the breaches that allow the green tide to flood inward. Other times, the breach comes through captured Imperial technology. A Ork warbus commanding a man large enough to threaten a space marine homeworld typically has access to truly impressive war machines. Stompers towering as high as Imperial knights, gargants that rival titans in size, captured siege equipment, or even primitive but effective nuclear weapons. These weapons, wielded with more enthusiasm than precision, can accomplish what conventional assaults cannot, cracking open fortifications that have stood for millennia. And occasionally, the breach comes through luck or accident. A stray shot from an Ork rocket launcher damages critical systems, creating a cascade failure. A teleportation attempt meant to strike somewhere else instead delivers a mob of Orks into a sensitive area. A tunneling operation intended to collapse defenses instead opens a path directly into the fortress. Orks generate so much chaos in their operations that sometimes the universe simply rolls dice in their favor, creating opportunities they weren't smart enough to deliberately create. Once inside the outer walls, the Orks find themselves in the fortress, monastery proper, a place designed for defense at every turn. The corridors are deliberately sized for space marines, which means they're manageable for Orks, but don't allow the easy movement of large numbers. Rooms are positioned to create natural choke points. Every intersection can be turned into a killing ground by a squad positioned to cover it. Blast doors conceal sections, forcing attackers to either break through or find alternative routes. And everywhere, monitoring systems track movement, allowing defenders to know exactly where attackers are and where reinforcements are needed. The Space Marines fight differently inside their own fortress. This is home ground, territory they might know intimately. They use the architecture to their advantage, falling back through prepared positions, each withdrawal leading the Orks into carefully designed traps. Heavy weapons teams set up at corridor intersections, creating lanes of fire that turn advancing Orks into paste. Close combat specialists wait in alcoves, ambushing groups that push too far ahead. Tech, Marines control automated defenses, activating turrets and weapon systems throughout the fortress to thin the Ork numbers. But the Orks adapt too, in their crude but effective way. They learn which corridors are death traps and start avoiding them. They use their own bodies as shields, pushing forward over the corpses of those who fell ahead of them. They employ their natural cunning, with some mobs creating diversions while others search for alternate routes. And crucially, they have numbers that even Space Marine fortifications cannot contain forever. Eventually, they penetrate deeper, breaking through secondary defense lines, overrunning positions that should have held, pushing ever closer to the heart of the fortress. It's during this grinding, brutal siege that the fortress, monastery's true value becomes apparent. It's not just a defensive structure but a factory, an armory, and a command center all in one. Tech Marines work continuously, repairing damaged weapons and armor, fabricating ammunition, keeping vehicles operational. Apothecaries tend to wounded battle brothers, performing field surgery and harvesting gene, seed from the fallen. Serfs and servitors maintain systems, keep generators running, and ensure that life support doesn't fail despite battle damage. The fortress is designed to sustain warfare almost indefinitely, as long as its defenders hold. But even the best defenses have limits. Casualties mount, ammunition stockpiles diminish, critical systems sustain damage, and the chapter master, watching from the command center, must make terrible decisions about which positions to reinforce and which to abandon, knowing that every Marine lost is irreplaceable. It's usually during this phase, when the situation is desperate but not yet hopeless, that the decision comes to awaken the chapter's dreadnoughts. This isn't done lightly. Awakening a dreadnought requires time. The stasis fields must be carefully powered down to avoid shocking the occupant's system. The warrior within needs orientation, needs to understand the tactical situation, needs time to fully transition from the dreamless sleep of stasis to the acute awareness required for combat. And once awakened, dreadnoughts represent a finite resource. If they fall in battle, if their sarcophagi are breached, the warriors inside die permanently, and with them dies irreplaceable knowledge and experience. But the situation demands their deployment. Orc forces have penetrated too deep, threatened too many critical areas. The Dreadnoughts are needed not just as weapons, but as force multipliers, their presence inspiring the defenders, and their firepower critical for holding key positions. Tech, Marines move through the Dreadnought crypts, beginning the awakening process with ancient rituals and careful system activations. One by one, the mighty war machines come online. Servos whining to life, optical sensors glowing with returning consciousness, weapon systems charging. This is usually when the Orks breach the crypt itself, in the chaos of battle. With attention focused on multiple threatened sectors, with the crypts, guards pulled away to reinforce other positions, some mob of Orks finds an entrance. Maybe they follow fleeing defenders through a blast door before it closes. Maybe they stumble upon a service tunnel that leads into the sacred halls. Maybe they quite literally blast their way through a wall without knowing what's on the other side. The method doesn't matter. What matters is that suddenly, Orks are in the one place the chapter would give anything to keep them out of. The initial moment of discovery is almost comical in its discordance. The Orks, expecting another corridor or chamber to fight through, instead find themselves in a vast hall illuminated by dim, reverent lighting. Rows of massive bipedal war machines stand in alcoves, each one decorated with centuries of honors, surrounded by religious iconography and monitoring equipment. The air smells of sacred oils and ozone. Everything about the space screams importance and power, and the Orks, being Orks, immediately recognize this as the best loot they've found so far. But this recognition comes with a critical misunderstanding. The Orks see dormant war machines. What they don't initially realize is that these machines aren't empty or unpowered. They contain sleeping warriors who are, at that very moment, being awakened. The timing couldn't be worse from the Imperium's perspective, or better from the Orks. The Dreadnoughts are vulnerable during awakening, their occupants disoriented, their systems not yet fully operational. But the Orks' presence triggers emergency protocols, accelerating the awakening process, even as it makes the freshly conscious warriors realize they're fighting not on some distant battlefield, but in their own resting place. What follows is warfare, unlike almost any other in the Imperium's long history. Ancient heroes, some sleeping for centuries, awakening to find their sacred halls violated. Ork looters realizing they've stumbled upon both the greatest prize imaginable and enemies more dangerous than any they've faced. Space Marine defenders fighting with berserker fury to protect their spiritual ancestors. And Tech, Marines trying desperately to complete the awakening process while battle rages around them. It's chaos in its purest form, and it's about to get much, much worse. The breach discovery of the crypts, the exact moment when the Orks breach the Dreadnought crypt, varies with each incident. But certain elements remain constant across these catastrophic events. It always begins with the violation of spaces that have remained inviolate for centuries or even millennia. The massive blast doors that seal the approaches to the crypts, each weighing hundreds of tons and secured with locking mechanisms that could withstand the direct hit from an anti-tank missile, stand as the final physical barrier between the sacred and the profane. When those doors fail, whether through explosive breach, mechanical malfunction, or simple overwhelming force, everything changes. Picture the scene: a mob of Orks, perhaps 2 or 3 dozen strong, has been pushing through the fortress monastery for hours. They're battered, many wounded, covered in the blood of their enemies and their own kind. They've lost half their numbers to Space Marine defenders, but remain undaunted, because to an Ork, good casualties just mean good fighting. They're led by a Nob, a particularly large and aggressive Ork, whose authority comes from his size and the massive power claw he's somehow looted from a dead Space Marine. Behind him come boys with an assortment of weapons, shooters, choppers, a few specialist weapons grabbed from fallen comrades. And crucially, there's at least one mech boy. Because there always is when Orks are looting. They've been following what they think is a promising route deeper into the fortress. Maybe they're chasing fleeing defenders. Maybe they're drawn by the sound of fighting elsewhere. Maybe they're just exploring, looking for anything valuable or interesting. The corridor they're in widens, the architecture becoming more ornate. The walls here aren't bare utilitarian surfaces, but are carved with scenes of battle and decorated with ancient heraldry. The Orks don't understand the significance, don't recognize these images as depicting the chapter's greatest victories, but they know fancy means important means good loot. Then they round a corner and stop. Before them stands a door unlike any they've encountered in the fortress so far. It's massive, 20 meters high, 15 wide, thick enough that they can't see the edges properly. The surface is covered in purity seals, each one bearing prayers and oaths in High Gothic that the Orks can't read, but instinctively recognize as important. Ocular symbols, each one 3 meters across, are embossed in the metal, and in the center, carved so deep that shadows pool within the recesses, are chapter symbols and warnings in multiple languages. To a human observer, the message would be clear: this is a sacred space, entry forbidden without authorization, violators will be subject to the most severe consequences. To the Orks, it's a big fancy door that's probably protecting something really good. The Nob grins, his massive tusks gleaming in the dim light, and barks orders. The mech boy steps forward, examining the door's locking mechanisms with the peculiar intuition that his kind possesses. He doesn't understand the technology in any technical sense, but he can see how it works, can identify what needs to be broken or bypassed. What follows is part demolition, part improvisation, part dumb luck, and entirely characteristic of how Orks solve problems. The mech boy slaps Det, charges against what he thinks are key points in the locking mechanism. Other Orks rig up rigged power sources, trying to override the door's systems. Someone finds what looks like a control panel and starts hitting it with a wrench, because that's a valid troubleshooting technique in Ork engineering. Through all of this, there's a sense of excitement building. The Orks know in their gut that this door wouldn't be so secure unless something incredible was behind it. Meanwhile, inside the crypt, alarms are already sounding. The tech, Marines monitoring the Dreadnought's awakening process, registered the breach of the corridor's outer security checkpoint minutes earlier. They've activated emergency protocols, trying to speed the awakening process while simultaneously sealing as many internal blast doors as possible. Servitors scurry through the halls, setting up additional defensive positions. The few Space Marines still stationed in the crypt proper take up positions, preparing to defend the sacred space to their last breath. But there are too few defenders and too little time. The fortress monastery is under attack from multiple directions simultaneously. Every Space Marine is needed somewhere. The crypts were supposed to be secure, their location deep within the fortress, and their heavy doors providing sufficient protection. While the Dreadnoughts themselves awakened, no one anticipated that Orks would penetrate this far this quickly, or that they would stumble upon this particular area in the chaos of battle. Back at the door, the mech boys' improvised explosives are ready. The other Orks back away, not far, because they want to see what happens, but enough that they probably won't die in the blast. Probably. The mech boy lights the fuse, or activates the detonator, or hits the big red button he installed, and runs. There's a moment of silence. That pregnant pause before catastrophe, where the only sound is the burning of fuses and the heavy breathing of eager Orks. Then the charges detonate. The explosion is massive, far larger than intended, because Ork explosives are never precise and usually more powerful than they should be. The blast wave knocks Orks off their feet, sending the closest ones tumbling backward. Dust and smoke fill the corridor, making it impossible to see. The Orks' ears ring, a sensation they find exhilarating rather than disorienting. As the smoke clears, they see the results: the massive doors warped, blown inward, with gaps large enough to squeeze through appearing around the edges. The Nob roars in triumph and charges forward, not waiting for the smoke to fully clear. Other Orks follow, their excitement overriding any sense of caution. They squeeze through the gaps, push through damaged sections, some using their enormous strength to pry the warped metal wider, and one by one, they stumble into the Dreadnought crypt itself, stopping short at what they see. The hall before them defies imagination, even by Orc standards of impressive things. It's vast, with a ceiling lost in shadows overhead. The walls stretch away into darkness on either side, punctuated by alcoves, each one illuminated by soft blue light from monitoring equipment. And in those alcoves stand giants. Dreadnoughts, dozens of them, row after row of 10-foot tall war machines, each one slightly different in design, but all unmistakably massive and powerful. They're decorated with honors. Purity seals flutter in air currents. Campaign badges cover armor plates. Ancient heraldry marks each chassis. Some are clearly ancient, their armor showing the distinctive design of patterns from the Great Crusade. Others are more recent, but even the newest look to have seen centuries of service. To the Orcs, this is the greatest treasure room imaginable. Each dreadnought represents incredible loot, weapons, armor, technology far beyond what they normally capture. The sheer size commands instant respect, because Orcs respect size and power above all else. But there's something else, something even the Orcs can sense. These machines aren't dormant in the sense of broken or powered down. They're sleeping, and they might wake up at any moment. The Nob makes a quick decision, the kind of tactical call that separates boss Orcs from mere boys. He assigns some of his mob to guard the entrance. There might be Space Marine counterattack, and they need to hold this position. The rest are to spread out and start examining these machines. The mech boy is ordered to pick one and figure out how it works. Maybe get it running. Several Orcs with specialized weapons are positioned to cover the room, and the Nob himself advances toward the nearest dreadnought, power claw raised, ready to claim the best prize for himself. This is the moment where time seems to compress. The Orcs are moving into the hall, spreading out, their excitement building as they get closer to these magnificent machines. The tech marines in the crypt are frantically trying to speed awakening processes while also calling for immediate reinforcement, knowing that they can't hold this position alone. The dreadnoughts themselves are transitioning from stasis sleep to consciousness, a process that normally takes careful minutes, but is being rushed through emergency protocols. And somewhere in the fortress monastery, Space Marine defenders realize that their worst nightmare is unfolding. Their Dreadnought crypt is breached. The first Orc to actually touch a Dreadnought does so almost reverently, which is unusual for his kind. He's drawn to the weapons mounted on the walker's arms, trying to figure out how they're attached, whether they could be removed. His thick fingers trace across armor plates, feeling the texture of ancient ceramite. He doesn't notice the almost imperceptible hum as power systems come online, doesn't see the optical sensors beginning to glow with returning life. He's so focused on examining potential loot that he doesn't realize he's standing next to something that's about to wake up very angry. Other Orcs aren't so cautious. They're climbing on dreadnoughts, looking for access panels. They're hitting armor with wrenches and hammers, testing durability. The mech boy has found what he thinks is the sarcophagus access, and he's prying at it with tools that shouldn't work but somehow do. Everywhere in the crypt, Orcs are touching, examining, attempting to loot ancient war machines that are, at that very moment, becoming conscious of their presence. The first dreadnought to fully awaken does so with a shock of sudden awareness. One moment there is nothing, the comfortable void of stasis sleep where time doesn't exist. The next moment there is everything, sensory input flooding in from dozens of systems, tactical displays activating, threat assessment protocols screaming warnings. The warrior inside, whose name might be Ancient Mordian or Venerable Castors, or any of a dozen others, has milliseconds to process what's happening. He's in the crypt. There are intruders. They're Orcs. They're touching him. They're touching his brothers. The response is instinctive, immediate, and absolutely merciless. Weapon systems that have been offline for decades or centuries suddenly activate. An assault cannon spins up with a distinctive whine that Orcs, who've faced heavy weapons before, recognize with shock. But there's no time to react, no time to dive for cover. The first burst catches 3 Orc center mass, the explosive rounds literally tearing them apart. The Dreadnought's other arm, mounting a power fist, swings with unexpected speed, crushing an Ork who was trying to climb the walker's leg. The fist doesn't just kill him, it reduces him to paste, demonstrating the tremendous force these weapons can apply. The Dreadnought's Vox casters activate, and a voice booms through the crypt, mechanical yet unmistakably filled with fury.
Discreo! Profana now!
Why you da de despair? The words are in Gothic, meaningless to the Orks, but the tone transcends language. This is rage, pure and incandescent. The wrath of an ancient warrior who has awakened to find his tomb violated and his brothers threatened. The Orks, to their credit, don't panic. They're Orks. But they do recognize they've made a terrible miscalculation. These weren't dormant machines to be looted at leisure. These were sleeping warriors, and they're waking up. The Nob bellows orders, trying to organize a response, but it's too late for organized anything. This is going to be a melee, close quarters, confused and brutal. Several Orks open fire on the now active Dreadnought, their shots sparking off armor that was designed to withstand far more powerful weapons. The Dreadnought responds by sweeping its assault cannon across their positions, the hail of explosive shells obliterating cover and Orks alike. And then the second Dreadnought wakes, and the third, and the fourth. Throughout the crypt, ancient warriors are returning to consciousness. Their awakening accelerated by the immediate threat to their sanctum and their brothers. Each one goes through the same rapid assessment: threat detected, extreme measures authorized, commence elimination of hostiles. What was supposed to be a careful, ceremonial awakening becomes an emergency activation. Systems coming online almost faster than their occupants can process, weapons charging with barely enough time for targeting protocols to complete. The tech Marines, watching from their control station, realize what's happening and make a desperate decision. They override safety protocols, forcing even faster awakening for the remaining Dreadnoughts. Better to risk system stress and disorientation than allow more Orks to establish positions in the crypt. One by one, faster and faster, the Dreadnoughts come to life, and each one immediately begins assessing the tactical situation and engaging enemies. For the Orks who breached the crypt, what started as exciting loot discovery has transformed into the fight of their lives. They're trapped in a vast hall with dozens of awakening war machines, each one capable of killing multiple Orks with every weapon salvo. The entrance they used is the only exit, and it's now cut off by battle. Some Orks try to fight, shooting at Dreadnoughts or attempting to engage them in melee, quickly discovering that even Ork strength is insignificant against machines that mass several tons. Others try to hide, taking cover behind alcoves or equipment, finding that there's nowhere in the crypt that's actually safe from Dreadnought weaponry. The mech boy, displaying the cunning his kind is occasionally capable of, makes a different choice. He's not trying to fight or hide. He's trying to accomplish something before he dies. He's at a Dreadnought that hasn't yet awakened, and he's working frantically to get the sarcophagus open. He doesn't fully understand what he'll find inside, but he knows it's important, knows that this is the secret at the heart of these machines. His tools screech against ancient metal. His improvised overrides bypass systems that should be impossible to hack. And just as the Dreadnought he's working on begins its awakening sequence, just as weapon systems start to activate, he succeeds in cracking the sarcophagus seals. What he sees inside would traumatize a human observer. The occupant of a Dreadnought sarcophagus barely resembles anything human anymore. Most of the body is gone, removed by apothecaries when the warrior was interred. What remains is kept alive by the most sophisticated life support systems the Imperium can manufacture, a form reduced to brain, vital organs, and connecting tissue. Suspended in amniotic fluid, wired into the machine through thousands of neural connections. It's horrifying and tragic, the price of immortal service made visible. The mech boy just thinks it's weird. He starts to reach in, maybe to examine the technology more closely, maybe just out of curiosity. He never completes the motion. The Dreadnought, fully conscious now and aware that its sarcophagus has been breached, goes berserk. The power fist swings with tremendous force, not at the mech boy. He's already dead, crushed against the sarcophagus itself, but at the ground, again and again, driven by a fury that transcends rational thought. This isn't just defense. This is violation of the deepest kind, a warrior's most private horror made manifest, and the response is pure, uncontrolled rage. This single event transforms the battle completely. Other dreadnoughts, witnessing one of their number violated, react with fury that makes their previous responses look measured. Orks who are trying to surrender, a rare thing, find no mercy. Orks trying to flee are hunted down. The tech marines, seeing what happened, override their own safety concerns and activate every remaining dreadnought simultaneously. Consequences be damned. Within moments, the entire crypt is alive with awakening war machines, and the Orks trapped inside face the full wrath of warriors who have every reason to hate them. The battle that follows isn't really a battle in any conventional sense. It's an execution, though one where the condemned fight back with desperate ferocity. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Before we can properly understand what happens next, we need to understand what it means for a dreadnought to awaken to such a nightmare, and what it means for the Space Marines defending their fortress to know that their most sacred space has been violated. The Awakening. Ancient fury unleashed. The awakening of a dreadnought under normal circumstances is a careful, ritualized process that can take hours. Tech, Marines chant litanies of reactivation, while systems are gradually brought online in precise sequence. Stasis fields are powered down incrementally to avoid shocking the occupant's systems. Life support transitions from hibernation mode to active status through carefully managed stages. Power cells are activated one by one. Neural connections are tested and verified. Only after all systems are confirmed functional and the occupant has been properly oriented to current circumstances is the warrior within allowed to take control of the chassis. Emergency awakening throws all of that careful procedure aside when immediate threat is detected. When the fortress monastery's ancient protocols recognize that the crypt itself is under attack, everything happens at once. Stasis fields collapse instantly. Power systems surge to maximum output, weapons activate without the usual testing sequences. And the warriors inside go from the dreamless void of suspended animation to full combat awareness in seconds, rather than hours. It's traumatic under any circumstances. When the first thing you perceive upon awakening is that your sacred resting place has been invaded by Orks, it becomes something worse than trauma. It becomes rage. Consider the perspective of Brother Ancient Gareth, a venerable dreadnought who has served his chapter for over 4 centuries. The last thing he remembers before sleeping was returning from a campaign against Eldar raiders, his sarcophagus being reverently returned to its alcove, the familiar faces of tech, Marines and chaplains conducting the deactivation rituals. He closed his eyes, metaphorically speaking, as his optical sensors powered down, expecting to sleep for days or months or possibly years until needed again. Time has no meaning in stasis sleep. There is simply the void, comfortable and complete. The awakening hits like physical impact. Every system activates at once, sensory input overwhelming, tactical displays flooding his consciousness with data, warning klaxons screaming in his audio receptors. His brain, kept alive by machines for 4 centuries, struggles to process the sudden influx of information. Where is he? When is he? Why has he been awakened? The standard orientation period that would normally answer these questions is absent. He has to figure it out from context, from the data his systems are providing. Location: the Dreadnought Crypt. Status: emergency activation. Threat level: critical. Intruders detected. Classification: Ork. Distance: immediate proximity. Weapons status: hot. Rules of engagement: unrestricted. Authorization level: maximum force authorized. The information cascades through his consciousness in milliseconds. He's in the crypt. There are Orks in the crypt. They're close enough to be touching him. He can feel it through his armor's external sensors, the disturbing sensation of alien hands on his chassis. Everything else becomes secondary to a single imperative: eliminate the threat. Eliminate the desecrators. Eliminate every green, skinned alien who dared violate this most sacred space. His assault cannon activates with a whine that builds to a scream. The targeting reticule in his visual display locks onto the nearest orc, a particularly ugly specimen, trying to pry at his sarcophagus seals. There's no hesitation, no warning given. The weapon fires, explosive rounds crossing the meter of distance, so quickly the orc doesn't have time to register surprise before being torn apart by the first burst. The second orc, this one climbing on his leg, dies to his power fist, grabbed and crushed with force that reduces armor and flesh to an undifferentiated mess. But Gareth isn't thinking tactically yet. He's operating on pure fury, his conscious mind still catching up to what's happening even as his combat instincts drive his actions. More orcs are nearby. His sensors identify them, his targeting system locks on, his weapons speak. The world narrows to a simple calculation: target fire, next target fire. The cognitive dissonance of the situation, the sheer violation of everything this place represents, manifests as berserker rage channeled through weapons designed to destroy tanks. Around him, other dreadnoughts are going through similar experiences. Ancient castors. Pilot lost decades ago, serving in the Death Watch, before being returned to his chapter for interment, awakens to voices shouting in a language he doesn't recognize. His first conscious thought is confusion. Where is his kill team? Why is he in the crypt? What's that smell? Then his optical sensors clear enough to see properly, and he understands. Orcs. In the crypt it's impossible, unthinkable, and yet undeniably real. His response is immediate and merciless. His weapons cutting down aliens who were examining the honors and purity seals covering his chassis. Venerable Mordian has the dubious honor of being the first dreadnought whose sarcophagus the orcs managed to breach. His awakening is unique and particularly traumatic because his first sensation upon returning to consciousness is exposure. His sarcophagus seals are open, the protective shell that has been his home for 2 centuries violated. There's alien presence immediately adjacent to what remains of his body, crude hands reaching into spaces that should never be touched. The life support systems are shrieking alarms, warning that containment has been compromised, that amniotic fluid is leaking, that the occupant is exposed to unsterilized atmosphere. The psychological impact is almost impossible for anyone who hasn't experienced dreadnought existence to understand. Imagine being paralyzed, completely immobile, kept alive by machines, and then having someone crack open your life support system to stare at you. Now add 10 times the vulnerability, 1,000 times the violation, and the knowledge that what's examining you is an alien barbarian who might decide to pull something vital just to see what happens. Mordian's response transcends fury into something primal and desperate. He doesn't use his weapons. He physically throws himself around, his massive chassis becoming a weapon itself, crushing the offending orc against the alcove walls again and again, driven by a need to eliminate the threat in the most direct, visceral way possible. The tech Marines observing from their control station watch in horror and grim satisfaction. Horror because they can see from their readouts that several dreadnoughts are experiencing severe stress, their systems pushed beyond safe parameters by the emergency activation. Grim satisfaction because those same systems are reporting impressive kill counts. Every dreadnought that awakens immediately begins eliminating targets, and the orcs, for all their natural toughness and ferocity, simply can't withstand sustained fire from weapons designed to penetrate tank armor. But the tech Marines also recognize a dangerous pattern developing. The dreadnoughts aren't coordinating, they can't. They're operating on emergency protocols, each one fighting essentially independently, driven by primal imperatives to eliminate threats rather than any tactical plan. This is effective in the short term, but dangerous in the long term. Friendly fire becomes a risk when multiple dreadnoughts are engaging targets in close proximity. Ammunition expenditure is unsustainable at current rates, and the psychological state of the awakened warriors is concerning. Several are showing signs of battle, fury that borders on loss of control. One of the tech Marines, a veteran named Lucian, makes a decision. He opens Vox channels to all awakened dreadnoughts simultaneously. his voice cutting through the chaos with words designed to reach through rage to the tactical discipline these warriors possessed in life. Ancient Ones, this is Tech, Marine Lucian, Authorization Omega 7. You are in the Dreadnought Crypt of our fortress monastery. The date is. He checks his chronometer. The 17th day of the 3rd month of the 740, first year of the current millennium. Ork forces have breached the crypt. Hostile count estimated at 30 to 40 individuals. Reinforcements are en route, but will not arrive for several minutes. Recommend coordinated defense of your brothers still awakening. Acknowledge receipt of this transmission. The effect is remarkable. One by one, the dreadnoughts acknowledge. Their vox responses ranging from crisp and professional to barely coherent growls of fury, but all responding. The simple act of providing context, of connecting these awakened warriors to time and place and objective, begins to restore tactical discipline. They're still furious. The desecration of their resting place isn't something that can be dismissed or forgiven. But that fury is now channeled into effective action, rather than blind rage. Ancient Gareth shifts from berserk assault to tactical engagement. His optical sensors scan the crypt systematically, identifying remaining threats and prioritizing them. Heavy weapons Orks first. Those shooters and rockets can't hurt him significantly, but they might damage the still awakening dreadnoughts. Then the Orks approaching those alcoves, prevent them from reaching his brothers before they can defend themselves. Then the mech boys. Those are always priority targets because they're both dangerous and clever. His assault cannon continues firing, but now in controlled bursts, each one hitting priority targets while conserving ammunition. Other dreadnoughts receive the orientation and adjust similarly. They begin moving with purpose, not just striking at the nearest enemy, but positioning themselves to defend specific alcoves or cover approaches to vulnerable areas. Venerable Castors, his ancient mind sharp despite centuries of sleep, immediately grasps the tactical situation and begins directing less experienced dreadnoughts via Vox. Brother Thaddeus, cover the eastern alcoves. Ancient Mordian, secure the entrance. We cannot allow reinforcements to reach them. All ancients, conserve ammunition where possible. We do not know how long this engagement will continue. Venerable Mordian, the dreadnought whose sarcophagus was violated, responds to Castor's order by positioning himself at the main entrance to the crypt. This is good tactics. His fury makes him unsuitable for precision work. But funneling that rage into holding a choke point is perfect. He plants himself at the narrow entrance, power fist ready, assault cannon trained on the approach. Any orc trying to enter or leave will have to get past him, and in his current state, that's effectively impossible. His Vox response to Castor's is simple. The desecrators will not escape. Not one. Meanwhile, throughout the crypt, other dreadnoughts continue awakening. Each one goes through similar experiences. Sudden activation, immediate threat assessment, and fury at the violation of their sanctum. But now they awaken into a crypt already defended by their brothers, with tactical coordination being established and enemies already reeling from sustained assault. The Orks, who moments ago were celebrating their discovery of incredible loot, are now fighting for survival in a space that has become a charnel house. The disparity in capability is stark, and only becomes more pronounced as more dreadnoughts come online. An orc with a shooter can fire hundreds of rounds at a dreadnought and achieve nothing beyond creating interesting patterns of ricochets. A dreadnought's return fire will kill that orc and probably several of his comrades with a single burst. An orc with a power claw might, if extremely lucky and skilled, damage a dreadnought's armor plating. A dreadnought's power fist will reduce that orc to a stain on the floor with casual ease. The orcs are tough, aggressive, and fearless, but they're facing enemies who combine tank, grade armor with centuries of combat experience. Yet the orcs don't break. They can't. It's not in their nature. Trapped in a crypt with dozens of angry war machines, they fight back with everything they have. Some target the dreadnought's joints, hoping to immobilize them. Others try to swarm individual walkers, gambling that even dreadnought weapons can't track and engage fast enough at point-blank range. The mech boys, facing certain death, make desperate attempts to sabotage something, anything, as a final act of defiance. And throughout it all, they're bellowing their war cries, making the characteristic WH sound that gives their species its terrible unity, trying to maintain morale through sheer noise and aggression. But it's not enough. It was never going to be enough. One by one, the orcs in the crypt die, not quickly or painlessly. Few deaths in Warhammer 40k are either, but inexorably. The Dreadnoughts methodically eliminate every hostile target, their fury cold now rather than hot, channeled into efficient execution of an unwelcome but necessary task. By the time Space Marine reinforcements finally blast through from outside, tactical squads from the 3rd Company, burning with their own fury at the violation of the crypts, there's little left for them to do except help clear the corpses and begin assessing the damage. The battle for the crypt entrance lasted perhaps 5 minutes from start to finish. In that time, over 30 orcs were killed, several dreadnoughts sustained minor damage, and one sarcophagus was breached. As battles go in Warhammer 40k, it was a small engagement, a footnote to the larger siege still raging throughout the fortress monastery. But for the warriors involved, particularly the dreadnoughts, it was something far more significant. It was the desecration of their most sacred space, the violation of their final rest, and a reminder that even in death, duty continues. And that duty sometimes means defending the very ground where you sleep. But the story doesn't end with the death of the orcs who breached the crypt. Throughout the fortress monastery, the siege continues. More orcs are pushing deeper. And now, instead of sleeping in honored silence, the dreadnoughts are awake and angry, and looking for something to take their fury out on. The halls of the fortress monastery are about to become far more dangerous for any greenskins unfortunate enough to encounter them. Battle in the halls of the ancients, the immediate slaughter in the Dreadnought crypt was only the beginning. As reinforcing Space Marines secured the breached entrance and tech, Marines began emergency repairs on damaged systems. The Dreadnoughts themselves faced a critical decision. Their sacred halls had been violated. Brothers still awakening needed protection. The logical response would be to remain in the crypt, using its defensible architecture to hold off any subsequent waves of attackers. But logic was contending with something more primal, a rage that demanded active retribution rather than passive defense. Brother Ancient Gareth articulates what many of the awakened dreadnoughts feel when he addresses the newly arrived Space Marine defenders. His voice, mechanically distorted but unmistakably filled with cold fury, echoes through the crypt's vast chambers. The orcs violated our rest. They defiled this sacred ground with their very presence. We will not cower here while they rampage through the rest of our fortress. We are awake, we are armed, and we will teach these aliens the cost of touching what belongs to the Emperor. The tactical squad sergeant, a veteran named Corin, understands immediately. Trying to convince dreadnoughts to stay put after what just happened would be futile and possibly counterproductive. Better to channel their fury into the broader defense of the fortress monastery. He voxes to the command center, reporting the situation and recommending that the dreadnoughts be integrated into the fortress's defensive strategy. The response is rapid approval. The siege is going badly in several sectors, and the arrival of multiple dreadnoughts could stabilize critical positions. What follows is remarkable to witness: the mobilization of nearly the entire chapter's complement of dreadnoughts. Under normal circumstances, these ancient warriors would be deployed carefully, one or two to support a specific operation, their use calculated and measured because of their irreplaceable nature. Now, driven by shared outrage and operating under emergency protocols, over 20 dreadnoughts prepare to sortie from the crypt simultaneously. This is an unprecedented concentration of ancient warriors, representing centuries of accumulated experience and firepower that would normally be distributed across multiple theaters of war. The tech marines work frantically to ensure all systems are functioning properly despite the rushed awakening. Ammunition hoppers are checked and refilled. Power cells are verified at full capacity. Weapon systems receive rapid blessing and consecration, Not the full rituals that would normally be performed, but enough to satisfy the machine god's requirements. And all the while, the dreadnoughts themselves test their systems, flexing mechanical limbs, cycling weapons, reacquainting themselves with the interface between consciousness and machine after whatever length of time they slept. The sortie from the crypt is a scene of grim magnificence. The massive doors, recently breached by Ork explosives, are forced fully open by dreadnought power fists. The ancient warriors emerge in pairs, their footsteps shaking the floor, their weapon systems sweeping corridors for targets. The space marines who watch them go describe a sense of awe mixed with pity. These are their chapter's greatest heroes, awakened not for some glorious campaign, but to defend their own resting place from crude desecration. The dreadnoughts spread through the fortress, monastery in small groups, guided by tactical updates from the command center. Ancient Gareth leads a group toward the eastern fortifications, where Ork forces have breached the outer wall and are pushing toward critical power generation facilities. Venerable Mordian, still seething from the violation of his sarcophagus, is directed toward the northern approaches, where the heaviest Ork presence is concentrated. Others are assigned to reinforce beleaguered defensive positions, clear corridors of infiltrating Orks, or establish strong points in critical junctions. The first encounter between the newly deployed dreadnoughts and Ork forces, unaware of their presence, occurs in the Hall of Victories, a wide corridor lined with battle honors and trophies from 1,000 campaigns. A mob of approximately 50 Orks, led by a massive warboss riding a crude bike, is pushing through against stubborn resistance from a single tactical squad. The Space Marines are falling back in good order, making the Orks pay for every meter gained, but it's clear they can't hold indefinitely. Then, from a side passage, Ancient Gareth and 2 other dreadnoughts emerge, and the tactical situation inverts instantly. The Orks' first indication that something is wrong comes when one of their flanking boys simply ceases to exist, replaced by a red mist and falling meat. The distinctive thunder of an assault cannon fills the corridor, and before the Orks can process what's happening, 3 more are torn apart by heavy bolter fire. The warboss, to his credit, reacts quickly, bellowing orders and spinning his bike toward the new threat. What he sees stops him momentarily. 3 towering war machines, each bristling with weapons, each decorated with centuries of honors, advancing with implacable purpose. The warboss does what warbosses do. He charges, roaring defiance, his power claw raised high, his bike's engine screaming. It's brave, even glorious by Ork standards. It's also completely futile. Ancient Gareth's targeting systems track the bike's trajectory, calculate intercept, and trigger a 3-round burst from his assault cannon precisely when the warboss closes to effective range. The explosive rounds don't just kill the warboss, they obliterate him and his bike, reducing both to scattered debris that tumbles through the air and crashes against the corridor walls. The rest of the mob, seeing their leader destroyed so casually, doesn't lose morale. Orks don't really do that, but they do recalculate their priorities. Some charge the dreadnoughts, seeking glory in single combat with such mighty enemies. Others turn their weapons on the approaching walkers, filling the air with shooter rounds and rocket trails. A few of the smarter ones try to flee, recognizing that this fight is unwinnable. None of these responses prove effective. The dreadnoughts advance through the gunfire, their armor shrugging off hits that would devastate normal infantry. The charging Orks meet power fists and heavy flamers, dying in explosions of gore and fire. The fleeing Orks are chased down and eliminated, because the dreadnoughts are in no mood to show mercy or allow survivors who might regroup elsewhere. The relieved tactical squad watches, in something approaching religious awe, as the dreadnoughts systematically dismantle a force that had been on the verge of overrunning them. When the last Ork is dead, Ancient Gareth pauses to address the squad sergeant. "Brother Sergeant, report your status and casualties." The fact that he takes time to check on the living Marines, despite his fury, speaks to the discipline and duty that define the dreadnoughts. The sergeant responds crisply, detailing his squad's situation, and Gareth acknowledges before moving on, seeking more orcs to punish for the desecration of his rest. Similar scenes play out throughout the fortress monastery. Venerable Mordian's group encounters a mob, trying to break into the armory, intending to loot weapons and ammunition. The orcs' crude attempts at breaching the armory doors are interrupted by the arrival of 4 dreadnoughts, and what follows is less a battle than an execution. Mordian, still driven by barely controlled rage, personally crushes the mob's knob with his power fist, lifting the struggling orc and squeezing until armor, flesh, and bone all compress into an unrecognizable mass. The other dreadnoughts sweep the area with weapons fire, ensuring no orc escapes to carry word of what they found. The psychological impact on both sides is profound. For the Space Marines, the sight of so many dreadnoughts active simultaneously is inspiring but also sobering. These are the chapter's greatest heroes, forced from their rest to defend their own halls. Every Marine who sees them is reminded of what awaits them, if they're grievously wounded. Not death and honored rest, but eternal service in a metal shell. Sleeping for decades between moments of violence. Its motivation to fight harder, to prevent the situation from deteriorating further, to prove worthy of these ancient warriors' sacrifice. For the orcs, the dreadnoughts represent something they rarely encounter: fear. Not terror that makes them flee. Orcs don't really do that, but a recognition that they're facing something genuinely superior. Individual orcs might be as strong as a space marine, and in sufficient numbers they can overwhelm even elite defenders. But dreadnoughts are beyond that calculation. They're mobile fortresses, each one worth a small army in combat power. The orcs who encounter them and survive, and few do, spread word that there are really big metal boys walking the fortress halls, changing how other mobs approach their invasions. But the orcs also demonstrate why they're such successful species, despite their apparent simplicity. They adapt. Mobs that learn about the dreadnoughts start setting ambushes, rigging crude explosives in corridors they expect the walkers to use. They concentrate fire on single targets, learning that while dreadnought armor is tough, sustained fire from enough weapons can eventually cause damage. They start bringing their own heavy weapons, rockets, big shooters, looted Imperial anti-tank weapons, and using them specifically against the dreadnoughts. One particularly clever mob, leading a mob equipped with meltaguns looted from dead Imperial guardsmen, manages to badly damage one of the dreadnoughts. They ambush it in a narrow corridor where maneuverability is limited, concentrating their fire on the legs to immobilize it, then targeting the sarcophagus housing. The dreadnought's occupant, ancient Castors, fights to the last despite catastrophic damage, his weapons still firing even as his chassis begins to fail. He manages to kill most of the ambushing mob before his systems finally shut down, but the damage is done. The dreadnought is inoperative. An extraction to the crypt for repairs will require dedicated recovery teams. This is the grim reality of warfare in the fortress, monastery's halls. The dreadnoughts are powerful, but they're not invincible. They're ancient machines, irreplaceable, piloted by warriors whose knowledge and experience span centuries. Every one lost is a catastrophic blow to the chapter, and yet they're being deployed in desperate defensive fighting, in narrow corridors and confined rooms where their advantages are minimized, because the situation demands every available asset. The fighting in the halls acquires a particular character, different from open battlefield warfare or even typical fortress defense. The corridors are designed for Space Marines, which means they're barely adequate for dreadnoughts. The walkers can fit, but with little room for tactical maneuvering. This forces both sides into grinding. Linear engagements where the dreadnought's firepower dominates, but mobility is severely constrained. Orks learn to use this to their advantage, forcing the dreadnoughts to fight through prepared positions rather than outflanking them. The architecture itself becomes part of the battlefield. Blast doors, normally used to seal sections of the fortress, become strongpoints that dreadnoughts defend, while Space Marine engineers try to complete emergency repairs. Intersection points become kill zones where dreadnoughts set up overlapping fields of fire, creating meat grinders that orc mobs must either bypass or charge through at terrible cost. Storage rooms and side passages become spaces where small groups of orcs hide, forcing the dreadnoughts to clear every room systematically. As hours pass and the battle continues, patterns emerge. The dreadnoughts are more effective when working in pairs or small groups, able to cover each other and concentrate fire. Individual dreadnoughts, while powerful, can be isolated and overwhelmed if enough orcs coordinate, a rare occurrence but devastating when it happens. The most effective deployment seems to be dreadnoughts, working in conjunction with Space Marine infantry. The dreadnoughts providing heavy firepower and resilience, while the Marines provide tactical flexibility and the ability to clear spaces too small for the walkers to enter. The command center tracks all of this in real time, watching tactical displays that show dreadnought positions throughout the fortress, their ammunition states, damage reports, and engagement status. Chapter Master Midnias, directing the overall defense, makes the hard decisions about where to commit these precious assets. A dreadnought directed to reinforce one position is a dreadnought unavailable for another, and every choice carries weight. He orders Ancient Gareth's group to hold a critical junction, despite heavy casualties elsewhere, knowing that losing that position would compromise the fortress's power grid. He authorizes Venerable Mordian to pursue a retreating orc mob, even though it means leaving another area temporarily under-defended, gambling that eliminating that particular threat is worth the risk. And through it all, the dreadnoughts themselves are conscious of their role, their significance, and the tragedy of their situation. They were awakened to defend their resting place, and that defense has expanded to encompass the entire fortress, monastery. They're fighting with characteristic fury and skill, but there's also a grim awareness that this isn't the glorious last stand of legend. It's desperate, grinding defensive warfare, where victory is measured in holding ground rather than gaining it. When one of the dreadnoughts falls, when Ancient Castor's systems finally fail completely in that ambushed corridor, the other awakened warriors feel the loss acutely. The Vox network carries the final transmissions, Castor's reporting critical damage, then warning his brothers about the ambush tactics, then silence. His last act is to share tactical information that might save other dreadnoughts. His last thought, if the mechanical systems can be said to carry thought, is duty fulfilled even as the systems shut down. The recovery of fallen dreadnoughts becomes a priority objective that sometimes overrides other tactical concerns. Space Marines risk their lives to retrieve damaged walkers, knowing that even if the occupant has died, the chassis itself is irreplaceable and may be restored to service with a new warrior. Tech Marines work under fire to perform emergency repairs, trying to get damaged dreadnoughts back into action. And always, the knowledge that every dreadnought lost is a hole in the chapter's strength that can never be truly filled. The hours stretch on. The battle for the fortress, monastery rages in dozens of locations simultaneously, and the dreadnoughts, awakened from their honored sleep to face an enemy that doesn't even understand what it's desecrated, continue their grim work of eliminating orcs with methodical fury. This is their fortress. These are their halls, and they will not allow the green tide to claim what they've spent centuries defending, looting the unlootable, while the dreadnoughts deploy throughout the fortress, monastery, and the main battle rages on. A different kind of engagement unfolds in the aftermath of the Crypt breach. The orcs who violated the sacred halls are dead, but they weren't alone. Other mobs have been pushing through the fortress, and word spreads among the greenskins that something incredible has been found. In the chaotic orc way, information travels through the
Dear's big metal boys, lots of real killy but also real shiny. Good loot if y'all can get it.
This is, of course, a dramatic simplification of reality, but it's enough to attract more orcs. Several additional mobs converge on the general area of the Dreadnought crypts, drawn by rumors of incredible loot and the prospect of fighting really big enemies. The Space Marine defenders, spread thin throughout the fortress, are forced to prioritize. Do they commit forces to holding ground that's already been violated, or do they focus on preventing orcs from reaching other critical areas? The answer often comes down to horrible calculus, How many lives? How many resources? What strategic value? The crypts are sacred. But they're also now dangerous for any orc who enters them, guarded by whatever dreadnoughts chose to remain behind, and by the very architecture that makes them defensible. One particular orc mechboy, a scarred veteran named Grimdacker, whose name translates roughly to serious firepower, approaches the crypts with more cunning than most. He's heard the stories about the Metal Boys, and, crucially, he's heard that their ancient technology, maybe even from before the current Imperium. To a mechboy, this is the ultimate prize, not just weapons to loot but secrets to learn, technology to study and possibly replicate. He gathers a mob of roughly 30 orcs, carefully selected to include several other mechboys and spanners, orcs with technical inclination and skills, and makes a plan that's sophisticated by orc standards. The plan involves not charging directly at the crypts, but finding an alternative entrance through service tunnels and maintenance passages. Grimdacker reasons, correctly, that the Space Marines will be watching the main approaches, but might not have resources to guard every access point. His mob spends several hours, an eternity in orc attention span, quietly navigating through back passages, following crude maps painted on walls by previous orc explorers, occasionally fighting scattered defenders, but generally avoiding major engagements. It's the kind of patient, methodical approach that most orcs are incapable of, and it works. They emerge into a section of the crypts that's distant from the main breach point, an area filled with dreadnoughts that haven't yet been awakened or deployed. The sight stops even these hardened orcs short. Row after row of dormant war machines, each one standing in its alcove like a statue, illuminated by dim monitoring lights. Covered in purity seals and honors, to Grimdacker's technical eye, these aren't just impressive, they're revelations. The armor construction, the weapon mounts, the power systems visible through maintenance panels, all of it represents technology that's more sophisticated than anything his mob normally captures. What follows is a bizarre scene: orcs trying to carefully examine Imperial technology without destroying it or getting killed. This is profoundly against orc nature. They're naturally destructive, prefer to smash first and figure things out later. But Grimdacker is insistent. He positions guards at every approach, sets up crude warning systems using looted Imperial sensors, and then begins the most delicate work of his career, trying to understand how dreadnoughts function without waking them up or triggering their defensive systems. The examination is revealing, though not in ways Grimdacker expects. The external armor tells its own story through battle damage, ancient repairs, layers of maintenance visible in different materials used across centuries. The weapons systems are sophisticated, beyond most orc technology, with targeting mechanisms that seem to work through principles the mechboy can't quite grasp. But the real puzzle is the sarcophagus at each dreadnought's heart. Grimdacker can see that it's important, can tell that everything connects to it, but he doesn't initially understand why until he manages to crack one open. What he finds inside horrifies his assistants, but fascinates Grimdacker in a disturbing way. The occupant of a dreadnought sarcophagus is barely alive by any conventional definition, a form reduced to essential components, sustained by machines, connected to systems through thousands of interface points. It's grotesque and impressive simultaneously, raising questions that even Grimdacker's straightforward orc mind struggles with. Why would they do this? Is the thing inside still alive? Can it think? If we take it out, will the machine work? The examination is interrupted by exactly what you'd expect. The dreadnought wakes up. The tampering with its systems, the opening of the sarcophagus seals, triggers emergency activation protocols. Grimdacker has perhaps 2 seconds of warning, system lights changing from blue to red. A sudden hum of power cells activating, before the dreadnought he's examining comes online, with all the subtlety of a thunderbolt. The orc's quick reflexes save him. He throws himself backwards as a power fist swings through the space he just occupied. His assistants aren't so lucky. 2 of them are caught by the initial sweep, reduced to red paste by weapons that were designed to destroy tanks. What follows is the kind of frantic, desperate fighting that orcs actually enjoy, even when losing. The Dreadnought, newly awakened and immediately aware that its sarcophagus was breached, fights with berserker fury. The Orks, trapped in the crypt with a walking nightmare, fight back with everything they have. Rockets slam into ancient armor, creating damage but not penetrating. Shooters create patterns of sparks, but accomplish nothing meaningful. One clever Ork tries to climb the Dreadnought and jam a grenade into an armor gap. He succeeds in placing the charge, but dies before it detonates, and the resulting explosion, while impressive, only succeeds in angering the walker further. Grimdarker, thinking faster than Orks usually do, realizes they can't win this fight. Even with 30 Orks, even with good weapons, they're facing something that was designed to survive battlefield conditions far worse than this. He makes a decision that's rare for Orks. He orders a retreat, not a panicked rout, but an actual tactical withdrawal, with some Orks laying down covering fire while others fall back. It's sophisticated enough that it actually works. Most of the mob escapes, though they're forced to leave behind their dead and, more importantly to Grimdarker, any tools and equipment they brought. But before fleeing, Grimdarker grabs something, not a whole weapon system. That would be too heavy and obvious, but components, pieces of the sarcophagus's life support system, torn free in the chaos. A few meters of the neural interface cabling, a small cogitator unit that seemed to handle targeting protocols. It's crude looting, smash, and grab rather than careful salvage, but he gets away with it. Stumbling through corridors with his mob, pursued by the furious Dreadnought, until they manage to lose it in the fortress's maze, like passages. Back in what passes for Ork-held territory, a section of the fortress they've managed to temporarily secure. Grimdarker examines his loot with the intense focus of someone who knows he's found something significant. He can't fully understand the Imperial technology, can't replicate it exactly, but he can see principles, can identify components that might be adaptable to Ork use. The life support systems give him ideas about keeping his own machines running longer. The neural interfaces suggest possibilities for better control systems. The targeting cogitator might be engineered into something that makes Ork weapons slightly less terrible at hitting targets. Meanwhile, other Orks throughout the fortress have their own encounters with Dreadnoughts, and some of these encounters result in successful, if Pyrrhic, victories. A mob of 50 Orks, led by a particularly massive knob, manages to bring down a Dreadnought through sheer weight of numbers and lucky shots. They swarm it, dozens of Orks climbing on the walker, jamming weapons into gaps in armor, pulling at cables and joints, dying in droves, but eventually succeeding in immobilizing it. The Dreadnought kills over 40 Orks before a well-placed rocket strike penetrates its sarcophagus, ending the occupants' centuries of service in a burst of uncontrolled fire. The surviving Orks immediately try to loot their prize. They strip weapons from the arms, crude but effective at removing mounting bolts. They pry armor plates free, fascinated by their apparent indestructibility. They attempt to extract the power core, not understanding the danger until it nearly explodes, killing 3 more Orks and destroying most of the loot they'd already claimed. By the time they're forced to flee by Space Marine counterattack, they've managed to salvage perhaps a quarter of the Dreadnought's components, leaving the rest as wreckage. But they have those components, and that's enough. Across the Ork-held portions of the fortress, mech boys begin attempting to integrate Dreadnought parts into their own creations. Most of these attempts fail. Imperial technology doesn't want to work with Ork technology, and even when jury-rigged connections are made, the results are unstable. But some attempts partially succeed. A Def Dread gets its close combat weapon replaced with a Dreadnought's power fist, and while it's not as effective as in Imperial hands, it's still a devastating melee weapon. A looted wagon receives upgraded armor plating, making it considerably tougher. Several Ork weapons get equipped with scavenged targeting systems, and while they don't suddenly become precision instruments, they do become slightly less terrible at hitting things. The most disturbing development, though nobody will know about it until much later, is when one mechboy manages to keep the sarcophagus from a destroyed dreadnought relatively intact. He doesn't fully understand what it is or what it contained, but he recognizes it as important technology, something worth studying. He packs it in a crude cargo container, planning to examine it more carefully when the battle ends. It's an artifact of the Imperium's darkest technology, knowledge about how they keep their greatest warriors alive, long past when they should have died, and it's now in Ork hands. What they might learn from it, what they might attempt to replicate or corrupt, is a troubling question with no good answers. Throughout these looting attempts, a pattern becomes clear. Orks can damage or destroy dreadnoughts if they're willing to pay a sufficient price in lives, and they can salvage components if they're quick and lucky. What they can't do is take an intact, operational dreadnought. The warriors inside will fight to the death, or beyond death, rather than allow themselves to be captured. Even when the chassis is disabled, even when the occupant is dying, they trigger self-destruct systems, overload power cores, or otherwise ensure that no useful technology falls into alien hands intact. This becomes significant when several Orks attempt to capture a damaged but still operational dreadnought. Ancient Mordian, the warrior whose sarcophagus was breached in the initial Crypt battle, has fought through the fortress for hours, his fury still white-hot. But sustained combat has taken its toll. His ammunition is nearly depleted, his armor has sustained significant damage, and one of his leg servos is malfunctioning. When he's cornered by a large mob in a collapsed section of corridor, the Orks see an opportunity, a wounded enemy, maybe something they can actually capture. They swarm him, not trying to kill but to immobilize, using chains and cables to tangle his legs, targeting joints with precision that's unusual for Orks. And it almost works. Mordian stumbles, his damaged servo giving out, and for a moment it looks like he might fall, might be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The Orks begin celebrating prematurely, already arguing about who gets to claim the greatest prize. Then Mordian triggers his reactor's overload sequence. The Dreadnought's machine spirit broadcasts a simple message to any Imperial forces in range. For the Emperor. For the chapter. None shall defile my remains. The explosion is massive, vaporizing dozens of Orks, collapsing the corridor, and ensuring that nothing useful survives. Ancient Mordian, who fought for centuries, who survived the breach of his sarcophagus and hours of desperate combat, chooses final death over the possibility of capture. It's the ultimate act of defiance, and the ultimate tragedy, a warrior so dedicated that even death is preferable to the dishonor of becoming Xeno's loot. The Space Marines, learning of Mordian's final act, respond with fury and grief in equal measure. They launch a major counteroffensive to recover what remains. Not much. Just fragments of armor and the remnants of the sarcophagus, but enough for proper burial rites. And they redouble their efforts to ensure no other dreadnought meets such a fate. Deploying guards specifically to support engaged walkers, evacuating damaged units before they can be overwhelmed, and hunting down any Ork mob that shows signs of coordinating anti-dreadnought tactics. The Orks, for their part, learn that while the big metal boys are incredible prizes, they're also incredibly dangerous to attempt looting. Some continue trying, driven by the potential glory and loot. Others decide there's easier prey elsewhere. But all recognize that these particular enemies are special, that defeating one is an achievement worthy of boasting, and that the Space Marines will fight with unusual fury to protect them. By the time the siege enters its final phases, perhaps a dozen dreadnoughts have been damaged or destroyed, and the Orks have managed to salvage components from maybe half of those. It's not insignificant loot. Mechboys cross the bullway, Gage! Will spend years studying and attempting to replicate what they've captured. But it's a pale shadow of what the Orks hoped to find when they first breached the crypts. The room, full of big shiny metal boys, has proven to be less treasure room and more death trap, and even Orks can learn from that kind of lesson. The greater implications the siege eventually ends, as sieges do. Either the Orks are repelled, driven off by sustained defense, and eventually reinforcements from other Imperial forces, or the fortress, Monastery falls and the chapter is forced to evacuate what it can. The specific outcome varies by incident, but the implications of Ork breach of the Dreadnought crypts remain consistent and severe regardless of tactical victory or defeat. What happens when the sacred is violated, when the irreplaceable is damaged or lost, reverberates through the chapter for decades or centuries afterward. From a purely military perspective, the loss of even one dreadnought is catastrophic. These aren't normal war machines that can be manufactured to replace casualties. Each dreadnought represents thousands of years of accumulated technology, and the knowledge to create new ones has been largely lost to the Imperium. When a dreadnought is destroyed, the chapter typically cannot replace it. They might, over decades of searching, find a damaged dreadnought chassis elsewhere and restore it. They might cannibalize parts from multiple damaged units to create one functional walker. But the idea of simply building a new dreadnought to replace a lost one is fantasy. The Adeptus Mechanicus itself struggles to maintain the few dreadnoughts that exist, let alone create new ones. The warrior inside is even more irreplaceable. These are veterans who remember the chapter's founding, or the early years after the Horus Heresy, or campaigns fought when the Imperium was significantly different than it is in the current era. Their tactical knowledge, their understanding of enemies long thought extinct, their wisdom about chapter traditions and culture, all of this dies with them. A destroyed dreadnought represents not just lost firepower, but lost institutional memory, lost links to the past, lost guidance that future generations might desperately need. Consider a hypothetical scenario. A chapter loses 3 dreadnoughts during an Ork siege of their fortress monastery. One of those dreadnoughts, Ancient Severus, was the last warrior who fought in the chapter's founding campaign. He remembered the Primarch's actual words and demeanor, not filtered through 10,000 years of myth and legend. He could explain why certain chapter traditions existed because he was there when they were established. When he dies, that knowledge dies with him, and the chapter becomes slightly more disconnected from its own history. Another lost dreadnought, Venerable Cassius, was the only warrior who remembered fighting a particular xeno-species that the chapter encountered in its early years. Those aliens haven't been seen in millennia, but they're not extinct, just dormant or distant. If they return, the chapter's response will be hampered by the loss of the one warrior who knew their tactics, their weaknesses, their technology. What was once institutional knowledge becomes guess, work and improvisation. The third lost dreadnought, Ancient Thaddeus, was the chapter's greatest tactical mind, a warrior whose advice had prevented disasters and won campaigns through his understanding of strategy. His loss is felt immediately in how the chapter fights, in the quality of decisions made at the strategic level, in the training of new officers who will never benefit from his wisdom. 3 dreadnoughts, 3 irreplaceable losses, and the chapter is permanently diminished in ways that can't be calculated by simple numbers. This is the strategic implication that makes the breach of Dreadnought crypts so catastrophic. But the psychological and spiritual implications are equally significant. For Space Marines, who view themselves as the Emperor's finest warriors, the desecration of their most sacred spaces is profound trauma. These aren't just buildings or facilities, they're shrines to duty, sacrifice, and the chapter's highest ideals. When Orks violate the Dreadnought crypts, they're not just stealing technology or destroying weapons. They're defiling everything the chapter holds sacred. The effects manifest in different ways across different Marines. Some respond with cold fury, channeling their rage into even more effective combat, determined to prove worthy of their honored ancients by killing every Ork they encounter. Others struggle with darker emotions, shame that they failed to protect the crypts, survivor's guilt if they lived while dreadnoughts died, anger at leadership decisions that might have contributed to the breach. The chapter's chaplains work overtime to help battle brothers process these feelings, conducting ceremonies of rededication and leading prayers for the fallen ancients. The dreadnoughts themselves, those who survived the breach and the subsequent fighting, carry their own psychological burdens. They were awakened not to fight on some glorious campaign, but to defend their own resting place from crude desecration. For warriors who have given everything, who exist in a liminal state between life and death, this violation cuts deeply. Many request to remain awake, rather than return to stasis sleep, unable to trust that they won't be violated again. Others experience what might be called depression, withdrawal from interaction, a reluctance to engage even when needed, as if the desecration broke something fundamental in their psyche. Tech, Marines who tended the crypts faced their own crisis. They had sacred duty to maintain and protect these ancient warriors, and they failed. It doesn't matter that the failure came from circumstances beyond their control, that no reasonable precautions could have prevented determined Ork breach during a major siege. The fact remains the crypts were violated on their watch. Some respond by doubling down on their duties, performing even more elaborate rituals of maintenance and protection. Others question whether the current security measures are sufficient, pushing for costly and disruptive renovations to make the crypts more defensible. The chapter's relationship with its dreadnoughts evolves after such incidents. There's often increased reluctance to deploy them, a heightened awareness of their irreplaceable nature that can paradoxically make them less effective because leaders become too cautious about committing them to battle. Alternatively, some chapters go the opposite direction, deploying dreadnoughts more frequently on the theory that keeping them active and ready is better than leaving them vulnerable in storage. Neither approach is necessarily correct, and the debates about proper dreadnought doctrine can become contentious within chapter leadership. From an inquisitorial perspective, the breach of dreadnought crypts and subsequent Ork looting raises serious concerns about potential technology proliferation. The Ordo Genos tracks reports of Orks with unusual technology, trying to determine if any Imperial secrets have been compromised. If Orks manage to replicate dreadnought systems, even in crude form, it could shift the balance of power in future conflicts. The Inquisition might order investigations, interrogations of survivors, and even exterminatus of Ork, held worlds where looted dreadnought technology might be stored. The Adeptus Mechanicus also takes interest, though from a different angle. They want to recover any lost technology, study how Orks attempted to replicate it, and understand what safeguards might prevent future breaches. They might offer assistance to the afflicted chapter, providing resources for repairs and enhanced security, but this assistance comes with strings: access to the chapter's records, examination of intact dreadnoughts to study their systems, demands for greater Mechanicus oversight of future maintenance. Some chapters accept this assistance gladly, others resist, viewing it as intrusion into chapter sovereignty. The political implications within the wider Imperium can be significant as well. A chapter that loses multiple dreadnoughts to Ork attack might be viewed as weakened, vulnerable, potentially unable to fulfill their obligations to defend their assigned region. Other chapters might offer assistance, a gesture of solidarity, or they might see opportunity to expand their own influence into regions now less effectively protected. Imperial commanders might hesitate to request assistance from a chapter that's perceived as diminished, creating a spiral where reduced reputation leads to reduced opportunities to rebuild strength. Some chapters respond to these pressures by concealing the extent of their losses, understating how many dreadnoughts were destroyed or how badly the crypts were damaged. This creates its own problems. When the truth eventually comes out, as it usually does, the chapter's credibility suffers. Other chapters are completely transparent, using their losses to argue for increased support from the Imperium or to justify extraordinary measures in pursuit of Ork retaliation. The psychological need for vengeance can drive chapter decision, making for years after the incident. A chapter whose crypts were violated might pursue the responsible Nawagate far beyond what strategic necessity would demand, spending resources and lives to punish the Orks who dared defile their sacred spaces. This can be militarily effective, terrifying other potential enemies with the ferocity of space marine vengeance. But it can also be wasteful, diverting the chapter from more important strategic objectives to pursue personal vendetta. In rare cases, the violation of Dreadnought crypts has led to chapter schisms. If a significant faction believes leadership decisions contributed to the breach, insufficient security, poor strategic choices, inadequate response to warnings, they might challenge the chapter master's authority. These internal conflicts can weaken the chapter further, sometimes resulting in formations of new chapters through complicated political maneuvering with the Adeptus Terra. The long-term cultural impact on the chapter is perhaps the most insidious implication. Before the breach, Dreadnought interment might have been viewed unambiguously as high honor. A warrior too valuable to allow to die, preserved to serve eternally. After watching Dreadnoughts destroyed by crude Ork weapons, after seeing the violation of the crypts, some Marines begin questioning whether this fate is truly honorable or whether it's actually a curse. These doubts usually remain unspoken, but they affect morale and recruitment, and they can change how the chapter views the whole concept of Dreadnought service. Some chapters respond by strengthening the mythology around Dreadnoughts, emphasizing their sacrifice and dedication even more strongly, turning the violated crypts into symbols of perseverance and duty. Others quietly dial back the reverence, treating Dreadnoughts as valuable weapon systems rather than sacred warriors, trying to create emotional distance that might make future losses easier to bear. Neither approach fully addresses the trauma, but both represent attempts to process collective grief and prevent it from paralyzing the chapter. The architectural response to crypt breaches often involves massive reconstruction projects. Chapters spend decades fortifying their crypts further, adding redundant security systems, creating multiple layers of defense, sometimes even relocating the crypts entirely to more secure locations. These projects are enormously expensive and disruptive, requiring resources that might otherwise go toward fleet expansion or equipment upgrades. But they're viewed as necessary. The alternative is unthinkable. The Orks, meanwhile, benefit from any technology they manage to loot, but they also gain something less tangible: proof that even Space Marine sacred spaces can be breached, that even the mighty Dreadnoughts can be killed. This knowledge spreads through the Ork collective consciousness in their characteristic imprecise way, making future WH slightly more likely to target Space Marine homeworlds and slightly more confident about their chances of success. In the grand scheme of the Imperium, the loss of a few Dreadnoughts might seem minor compared to the millions of lives lost every day across 1 million worlds. But for the chapter involved, for the warriors who witnessed the desecration, for the tradition and culture built over millennia, the implications are profound and lasting. They fought to prevent exactly this nightmare scenario. They failed despite their best efforts, and now they must live with the consequences while ensuring it never happens again. This is the price of vulnerability, the cost of having treasures that enemies desire and the inability to perfectly protect them. In Warhammer 40k's grimdark universe, even the most sacred spaces aren't truly safe, even the most powerful warriors can be destroyed, and even the noblest sacrifices can end in desecration rather than honored glory. Conclusion: the eternal struggle between sacred and profane, when Orks discover and breach a Dreadnought crypt. They trigger one of the most emotionally charged confrontations in the Warhammer 40k universe. It's not just another battle, another siege, another engagement in the endless grinding warfare that defines the setting. It's the collision of two fundamentally incompatible worldviews: the Imperium's desperate reverence for its heroes and the Orks' gleeful irreverence toward everything, playing out in spaces designed to honor eternal service and violated by beings who barely understand the concept of honor. We've journeyed through the multiple layers of this catastrophe, from the sacred nature of the crypts themselves to the savage enthusiasm of the Orks, from the traumatic awakening of ancient warriors to the desperate battles in fortress, monastery halls. We've examined the looting attempts, both failed and tragically successful, and explored the wider implications that ripple through the chapter and the Imperium when such violations occur. Through it all, certain truths emerge about what makes these encounters so significant. The first truth is about irreplaceability. In a universe of mass production and planetary-scale warfare, where millions die daily and armies number in the billions, the Dreadnoughts represent something rarer: warriors who truly cannot be replaced. When ancient Mordian self-destructs rather than face capture, when ancient Severus falls to Ork weapons, something unique and precious is lost forever. The technology, the knowledge, the living connection to the past, all gone in moments of violence. This makes every Dreadnought Crypt breach not just a tactical setback, but an ontological wound to the chapter, removing pieces of its identity that can never be restored. The second truth concerns the nature of desecration itself. The Orks don't understand what they're violating, which somehow makes the violation worse. They're not defiling the crypts out of calculated cruelty or ideological hatred. They're doing it because they found some interesting loot and want to take it home. The utter disconnect between the sacred meaning Space Marines ascribe to the Dreadnoughts and the enthusiastic practicality with which Orks approach them creates a tragedy that transcends simple combat. It's the universe demonstrating, yet again, that meaning and significance exist only in minds that recognize them. And those minds are always vulnerable to forces that don't care. The third truth relates to the transformation of duty into burden. The Dreadnoughts exist in a state that could be described as blessed or cursed, depending on perspective. They're honored heroes serving eternally, or they're trapped souls unable to find peace, forced to fight long past, when they should have been allowed to rest. When the crypts are breached, when they awaken to find their resting places violated and their brothers threatened, the distinction becomes sharp and cruel. This isn't glorious eternal service, it's an eternal crisis, a never-ending need to fight and protect and suffer, with the possibility that even your tome isn't safe from violation. Yet there's also a truth about resilience here, about the stubborn refusal of both humans and Orks to be defeated by circumstance. The Dreadnoughts awaken to nightmare scenarios and respond with discipline, coordinating their defense despite trauma and fury. The Space Marines fight to reclaim violated spaces and protect what remains. The Tech Marines work under fire to repair systems and improve defenses. Even in catastrophe, even when the sacred is profaned and the irreplaceable is lost, the Imperium's warriors continue their duty. Similarly, the Orks demonstrate why they're such successful species. They adapt, learn from mistakes, and continue pushing forward with enthusiasm, undimmed by casualties that would break other races. These encounters also reveal something about the nature of the 40k universe itself. This is a setting where nothing is truly safe, where no sanctuary is inviolable, where even the most elaborate precautions can be defeated by sufficient force or random chance. The fortress. Monasteries are among the most heavily defended locations in the Imperium, built to withstand any assault, and yet Orks still break through. The Dreadnought crypts are secured with every defense the Adeptus Astartes can devise, and yet alien hands still reach the sacred machines. The universe is simply too vast, too chaotic, too filled with threats for perfect security to exist. If you've been captivated by this deep dive into one of Warhammer 40k's most tragic scenarios, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We explore the grimdark universe's deepest lore, from the mightiest heroes to the darkest threats, always with the detail and atmospheric storytelling that brings these tales to life. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode as we continue exploring what happens when Warhammer 40k's factions collide in the most dramatic and devastating ways possible. The story of Orks breaching Dreadnought crypts is ultimately a story about cost. The cost of eternal service. The cost of treasuring things that others want to steal. The cost of building civilizations that must be defended. The cost of fighting wars where victory is never final and peace is never possible. These costs are paid by warriors like ancient Mordian, who gave everything only to have even his death turned into a weapon against the enemy. They are paid by Tech, Marines who dedicate their lives to maintaining warriors who might be destroyed despite their efforts. They're paid by chapters who must continue functioning even after their most sacred spaces are violated and their greatest heroes fall. In the grim darkness of the far future, There is only war, and sometimes that war intrudes even into the places where warriors go to sleep between battles. The Dreadnought crypts represent the Imperium's attempt to preserve its heroes, to honor service that transcends death, to maintain links to the past across millennia. When Orks find these crypts, when they breach the defenses and threaten the ancient warriors within, it becomes a test of everything the Imperium claims to value about duty, sacrifice, and the protection of the sacred. The Orks pass this test in their own way, proving yet again why they're such dangerous enemies despite their apparent crudeness. They show that enthusiasm and numbers can overcome even the most sophisticated defenses, that audacity can achieve what careful planning cannot, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are found by those too simple to recognize they shouldn't be looking for them. They pay terrible prices for their victories, losing dozens or hundreds of warriors to claim even a single dreadnought's components, but from their perspective, these prices are entirely acceptable. Death in a good fight, in pursuit of impressive loot, against powerful enemies. That's everything an Ork could want. The Space Marines, forced to respond to these violations, demonstrate why they're called the Emperor's finest. Even in crisis, even when defending their most sacred spaces from desecration, they maintain discipline and tactical competence. They make terrible choices about resource allocation, accepting losses in some areas to prevent catastrophe in others. They fight with fury but channel that fury into effective action, rather than blind rage. And when their dreadnoughts fall, they ensure the sacrifice isn't wasted, learning lessons that might prevent future breaches. In the end, what happens when Orks find an entire dreadnought crypt is a microcosm of the entire Warhammer 40k universe. Tragedy and heroism, desecration and defiance, chaos meeting order in violent confrontation, where both sides believe themselves justified and neither will yield. It's a story worth telling because it reveals truths about sacrifice, vulnerability, and the price of trying to preserve anything sacred in a universe that recognizes no sanctity. And it reminds us why, despite 10,000 years of endless war, the Imperium persists. Because even when the sacred is violated, even when the irreplaceable is lost, there are always warriors willing to fight on, to defend what remains, and to ensure that those who defile what the Imperium holds dear pay the highest possible price. Thank you for joining us on this deep exploration of one of Warhammer 40k's most harrowing scenarios. Remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments about how your favorite chapter might respond to such a catastrophe. Until next time, stay vigilant, honor the fallen, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and even the tombs of heroes are not safe from its reach.